Some recent philosophy associated with the ontological term posits vibration as the shared substance or shared physical propensity par excellence, averring that we are all made of, involved in, and affected by vibrational phenomena. Elizabeth Gross, for instance, regards vibration as, quote, a common thread or rhythm running through the universe. It is vibration that constitutes the harmony of the universe with all its living components. Vibration is also implicit etymologically in the radically inclusive political ontology of Jane Bennett's vibrant matter. Such theory interrogates human exceptionalism and the problematic dichotomies that characterize Western modernity: subject versus object, mind versus body, nature versus culture, animate versus inanimate, and so on. In music and sound studies, too, a turn towards ontologies centered in material vibrationality is evident today. In this kind of thinking, matter is not simply inert or passive. New materialism instead articulates a sense of a more than human polity as the subject of political and ethical concerns that previously implicated only humans as political subjects and actors. This analysis frames human and non-human entities and phenomena as materially co-substantial in order to motivate an inclusive ethical imaginary. Nina Eichheim's monograph Sensing Sound argues that, quote, understanding music on par with other intermaterial vibrational phenomena questions the division between material modes, including the exclusion of some from our attention. Convergently, Ashley Furie's installation opera, The Force of Things, centralizes vibrating materials like speaker cones, monochords, and sculpted paper. Citing Bennett and others, Furie aims for listeners to empathize with the vibratory animacy and thing power of the work's physical materials. This empathy is ontologically grounded. Shared material capacities to vibrate secure the commensurability of all entities at the level of physical being, and this is meant to translate into ethical commensurability. Along with critiques by Diana Leong, Robin James, Marie Thompson, and others, I argue that new materialism's ethico-political imaginary locates a certain strategic value in provoking in-group sentimentation amongst a vast collective of earthly material entities. It is consistent with vernacular ethical pieties that elevate togetherness, relationality, and deeper unification. Sentimental appeals taking the form of, deep down, we really are alike. But such sentiments lean on dispelling difference as an illusion or superfice, recruiting logics shared with post-raciality and recentering whiteness. In-group sentimentation is, of course, a cornerstone of in-group supremacist ideologies. Certainly, new materialism correctly diagnoses that forms of discrimination based on hierarchy and consequent forms of reductionism or callousness are not ethically desirable. However, its solution is not to decouple difference from deficiency. Rather, its solution is to frame difference as a superfice or an illusion, a mere appearance contravened by deeper realities, and thus to banish or dispel difference. As Eichheim writes in Sensing Sound, quote, we are one and the same as the vibrations, end quote, citing Lindsay's Wheel of Acoustics, for example. In such work, the uninterrogated appeal to physical facts and the epistemic authority of scientific findings produce irrefutable imperatives towards an affirmative politics of utter relationality and social wholeness. However, Zakiya Iman Jackson argues that new materialism's appeal to empirical, physical, or natural properties and universal facts is itself deeply consistent with the imperialist, colonialist rationality of Western modernity, the very set of ideologies it explicitly aims to escape. The radically flat, inclusive material ontologies of recent philosophy and sound studies strengthen phobias towards difference, even as they strive to espouse radical inclusivity. New materialism's ethical framework simply deprives of ammunition the mechanism that degrades individuals by associating their difference and non-normativity with deficiency, since its radically inclusive flat ontologies can recognize no non-illusory and hence genuine forms of difference. However, this sort of thinking, both within and outside of music and sound studies, does not decouple deficiency from non-normativity and difference in the first place. Kyla Wazana-Tompkins warns that, quote, much new materialism cannot deal with race. The move to a kind of ontology-centered hermeneutic suppresses the question and the problem of difference, end quote. Nina Eichheim's The Race of Sound would seem to directly contravene new materialism's failure to address race. She argues that vocal timbral attributes of different racialized persons arise not from any physiological mind-independent differences that could reliably index the raciality of the vocalizing body, but instead from thick layers of enculturation and disciplining in both the producers and hearers of vocal sounds. Among its objectives is to, quote, move us from unexamined essentialization to a consideration of our participation in the process of reduction, end quote. This is admirable, but certain infelicities result from the new materialist commitments, including a sense that the race of sound ends up framing racial difference as superficial in relation to deeper ontological and material truths. Eichheim describes this material layer of reality in departicularizing and deracializing terms as a, quote, continuous vibrating field with undulating energies, flesh, bones, ligaments, teeth, air, longitudinal pressure in a material medium, molecules, and much more, end quote. This characterization has the effect of making categories themselves disappear by appeal to the commonness of vibrational depersonalized bones, teeth, and submicroscopic particles. The critical desire in The Race of Sound is that reductions of individuals to sonic stereotypes be impossible to sustain. But the unbidden result of how it incorporates its new materialist components is that that which is different gets cherished in spite of or outside of markers of its difference. This ethical imaginary is hardly lifted free from the inscription of race. With respect to very different concerns, Achille Mbembe's On the Post-Colony summarizes that difference-phobic formulations reinforce certain attitudes towards difference. Quote, here is a principle of language and classificatory systems in which to differ from something or somebody is not simply not to be like, in the sense of being non-identical or being other. It is also not to be at all, non-being. More, it is being nothing, nothingness, end quote. Mbembe's prose here should suggest that new materialism's fundamental disavowal of difference as such, in favor of the homogenizing appeal to deeper material ontological commonality, has some unfortunate parallels with aspects of the West's global thinking. The habitual maneuver of thought that ultimately rejects difference, even as it includes those that are different, precisely by sidestepping their difference, has historically received some of its most strengthening exercise in anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, anti-Africanity, and coloniality. Just as the All Lives Matter dictum is configured to negate the exhortation that Black Lives Matter and the specificity of that exhortation, new materialism's conception of a radically collectivized flat polity wherein racial difference gets framed as an illusion directs attention away from the manifold specific difficulties for members of the polity and occludes their particularity. A critical accounting for new materialism's favored categories of analysis, such as materiality, thinghood, the non-human, objects, and vibration, may reveal not so much a movement away from the human sphere towards domains beyond or post the human, but rather to a retrenchment into humanism's condescensions. Who, to liberal humanism's colonial and anthropological gaze, have been thought of as merely material bodies lacking in history, rationality, and will? Who was it that became objectified and reduced to machinic, inhuman flesh in the operations of plantation capitalism, Fordist capitalism, and now prison labor capitalism? And who has been thingified and exoticized as sexual commodity and bodily spectacle in liberal modernity, all of which depend on the regular, rhythmic, vibratory, and oscillatory movements of those bodies? Moreover, the predominantly white theorists of new materialism and related formations have by and large neglected to acknowledge POC scholars and their contributions to thinking objecthood, materiality, and so forth. Fred Moten, in The Break, for instance, writes that, quote, the history of blackness is testament to the fact that objects can and do resist, end quote. What does it mean, then, when Bennett centers her project on the resistant force of assemblages of thinghood and the material recalcitrance of objects, but with no mention of race or of non-white scholars' work on materiality? Métis anthropologist Zoe Todd likewise argues that ontology is just another word for coloniality, noting how new materialist and post-humanist work is convergent with indigenous attitudes that are hardly new. Her point is that the ontological turn reinstantiates Western scholars' habits of invisibilizing the indigenous and POC perspectives that consonate with and precede its own. With the above in mind, the recent critical captivations with things, objects, the material level, or vibration can signify captivity rather than commonality, invisibilization rather than equality, and might remind subjects of the terms of their privation rather than embracing them in relationality. Let me reveal something. I am actually deeply sympathetic to many of new materialism's aims, including its important critique of human exceptionalism and its attention to the Anthropocene environment's materialities. But as you have seen, I am deeply skeptical of the naivety of its political ontology, its uninformed citational practice, and the unfocus of its ontology-derived ethics. I think there are ways for scholarship on materiality, undeniably an important topic, to avoid many of these pitfalls, but they definitely aren't located in the ontological terms ontoethics, which remain hegemonic.